Good. Okay, Gavaldik. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us as we continue our limud of Likutei Moharan Vav. Just a brief summary of what we were learning yesterday. So after we had learned about Tshuva and K'vod Malachim and K'vod Elikim and how a person climbs out of K'vod Malachim through the process of Kishiyishma B'zyono Yida V'yishtaik, when a person turns dam, right, which is gematria Ekev Astaras V'achsaras Panim, a person turns that dam into daim, and a person remains silent. Through that, daim laHashem v'hischaylalai, there's an aspect of libi chalal b'kirbi, which is an aspect of shechting and slaughtering the Yetzer Hara, which is referred to in the pasuk Zeveach Toidei Chavdanit. We learned about that. We learned about the concept of tshuva al tshuvasai, how a person needs to be constantly doing tshuva on the tshuva that they do. And in the second form of that, where a person mamish does a proper tshuva, and a person's sfasayim and a person's lave are aligned properly. So we learned about how a person is zeicha not just to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a bechina, in an aspect of K'vod Olam Hazeh, but actually a person is able to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu in K'vod Olam Haba, and that was referred to in the Gemara that said Kol HaZavech Es Yitzray U'Misvada Alav, so that's tshuva, and then tshuva al tshuvasai Ki'ilu Kibdu LaHaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Shnei Olamais Ar Yikaros V'Kifayan, that the light that was bright in this ring Olam Hazeh, right, which means the first initial tshuva, once a person does tshuva, their hasaga expands, and kifayin, right, is kafwe v'kal, said the Gemara, la'olam haba, because neged, the kavod of k'vod olam haba, the k'vod olam hazeh, the tshuva, that original tshuva, is very weak, and that's not really where it's at. Yesterday we spent a lot of time on the new construct that Rebbe Nachman is introducing into this broader framework called Baki B'Ratzai and Baki B'Shaiv. That a person who wants to do tshuva needs to know that there are going to be two different phases and stages in the perpetual process of tshuva. Because once the Rebbe defined tshuva as tshuva al tshuvasai, it turns out that it isn't just a one-time event in a person's life, but rather a person's constantly on the paths of tshuva. And the paths of tshuva take a person from the bechina of olam hazeh, and then they go into k'vod olam haba, right? And then vis-a-vis the next layer up, they're on the bottom again. And then they start again, and then so on and so it goes. And each and every time that they're in a bechina of k'vod olam hazeh, which is in a certain sense the aspect of achsaras pnei ekya, where they realize ana zaman l'mehevi, I haven't even become yet. I'm just starting to want, to yearn, to become something, right, and to live in this world with a true havaya, with a true sense of existence. All the while that happens, the person is going to experience each time a new bizayon, right? With an internal kind of shame that's telling the person that you're not living the way that you're supposed to be. And that's the bechina of Baki B'Shaiv, right? Where a person is on the lower level and needs to give themselves strength to recognize Malach ha'aretz kavayda. This is not about me, and it's not about my success. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs from me. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. We spoke at length last night, right, about being a human, anshe kodesh tiyanli mishpatim, not just Yisrael, right, dealing with your mazik side and not just the mispalel side, right, this aspect of being a human being. So then you get over the affront and assault on the person's own kavod, because the person wants to be the greatest tzaddik in the world, and relatively speaking, there are always higher madregas. A person turns dam into daim, and so it goes, and a person rises into the bechina of Baki B'Ratzai, and this is Ratzai and Shaiv, and the Rebbe said all of this really fits in to the framework of the letter Aleph, because the letter Aleph has a lower nakuda, the letter Aleph has a higher nakuda, and the letter Aleph has a vav in the middle. And the Rebbe told us that the vav in the middle, we know from the Zohar Kadosh, is called rakia. The vav in the middle is called rakia, and again, that is our starting point in order to then have a relative structure of what is above the rakia and what is below the rakia. Because then the Rebbe finds two psukim, one of which references something that's above the rakia, and the other which references something that is below the rakia, namely the aretz. Once we know that the vav in the middle of the aleph is the rakia, then I'm able, relatively speaking, to know that which is referred to by the pasuk as above the rakia is the nekuda elyoina of the aleph, or the yud, above the vav within the aleph, and that which is below the rakia is going to be the nekuda tachtoina, which is the yud below the vav of the aleph. What are those two different aspects? Well, let's start first with the nekuda tachtoina. Said the Rebbe, the pasuk says, "V'tachas raglav k'masa livnas hasapir," and the Zohar Kadosh told us that livnas hasapir is the nekuda of the chirik, which is going to become very important, which we'll see. That's the chirik. And what is tachas raglav? Tachas raglav is a bechina of hadoim raglai, and that's the pasuk that says v'ha'aretz hadoim raglai. The aretz is Hashem's footstool. Where is the aretz? Below the rakia. Okay, so now I identified what the nekuda tachtoina is. What's hadoim raglai? Says the Rebbe, hadoim, right, which means silent. Hadoim raglai. So demima ushtika is going to be nekuda tachtoina. That's the first capacity of a person to hear himself being embarrassed and not to respond. And that in that place, a person is in a bechina of k'fayid malachim. A person is in a bechina of ekya b'achsaras panim, right? And they're climbing out of that space of dam, and they're turning dam into daim. That's nekuda tachtoina. The vav in the middle, says the Rebbe, is rakia. What's rakia? Shamayim. What's shamayim? Eish umayim. Eish umayim is called klalius gevanim, right? It's chesed and gevura. It's white and red, and that's reflected in this, that a person who is experiencing busha, their face is turning colors from red to white, and that's all the aspect of the busha that's captured in the vav in the middle. Finally, the nekuda elyoina is called umima'al l'rakia, asher al roisham even sapir demuskise. There is a throne that sits above the rakia. Again, the rakia is the above the rakia is the nekuda elyoina. What's the nekuda elyoina in the construct that we're building over here of moving from demimo shtika, which is va'aretz hadoim ragloi, into the bechina of rakia, which is shemayim, which is busha? What's the next level above? Is true tshuva. True tshuva is the bechina of keser. Person reaches the crown. A person reaches that lofty level. And the crown, keser, is connected to the concept of a kisei, because kisei means lachasot, to cover. It means a chair. But in this context, the Rebbe says it means to cover. And that which is covered is a reference to keser, as the Gemara tells us, "B'mufla mimcha al." Was the lashon al tidrash, right? That which is hidden from you, don't seek. Uva mechusa mimcha al tachkar. Uva mechusa mimcha is a reference to keser, which is called ayin. It's nothingness. There's no chakira in the place of keser, because we don't really know, we don't really understand what a Kadosh Baruch Hu's motivation in creating the world is. That's the simplest way of understanding this, that keser is impenetrable to us. Ba mechusa mimcha. And al tachkar is a reference to this, that k'fayid elikim haster davar, right? When a person reaches k'fayid elikim, they reach a place of kisei de miskasia, they reach a place of keser elyon, which is concealed, it's covered over. And that aspect of k'fayid elikim haster davar is a contrast to the beginning of the pasuk, which says k'fayid malachim chakar davar. And so K'fayid Malachim Chakar Davar means that in K'fayid Malachim, a person sinks down into a place that actually could be investigated and will be investigated, because it's a subjective kind of cover that will have everybody saying Mihu Zeh Ezehu, right? And they're Chalk and love, and everybody's arguing on such a person. But once a person reaches that level of Keser, that level of K'fayid Elikim, Haster Davar. It's the opposite of Chakar Davar, and therefore Al Tachkar. A person reaches al Tachkar. Then we said that all of this is really crucial to a person existing, because we said earlier on in the lesson in Ois Beis that before a person starts walking on the paths of tshuva, ki ilu ein loy havaya. It's like they don't exist, right? Because the Gemara tells us, Toiv loy la'adam shaloy nivra, mi shenivra. It would have been better for a person not to have been created than to be created once a person's here. Yimashvish b'maisav, yifashish b'maisav. A person should walk on the paths of tshuva. So in order for a person to actually exist as an Adam, says the Rebbe, the only way is to go through this process, because the 2 second thirds of the word Adam is Dalid Mem, which is Dam, And then the Rebbe says you take the dam and you turn it into daim. Once you turn the dam into daim, you've kick-started a process which will enable a person to walk the paths of tshuva, baki b'shoiv, and then baki b'ratzai, and that is the letter Aleph, and that is Adam, Aleph, daim. And therefore the Aleph really captures all of the different concepts that we've learned in the past 3 shiurim, and that's where we're up to currently on page Zayin, and we begin on the top left corner with Va'az Nase Yichud. When a person goes through this process, you make a yichud, you make a unification between the sun and the moon. And of course this is going to harken back and bring us back to Torah Aleph, right? About binding together the nun and the ches, the levana and the shemesh. It's all interconnected. All these concepts, it's an algorithm. We keep on adding new points. Then a person makes a yichud between the chama and levana. How so? What does this even mean to make a yichud between the chama and the levana? Very simply, shahashemesh me'ir la levana, that the sun is able to shine into and illuminate the moon. And if the sun is shining into and illuminating the moon, that's the bechina of a yichud bein Moshe v'Yoshua. That's going to make a connection between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yoshua. Why is the connection between the sun and the moon correlated to a yichud between Moshe the Rebbe and Yeshua the Talmud? Because the Gemara tells us in Baba Basra, Kibnei Moshe, Kibnei Chama, Moshe's face shone like the face of the sun. He was the mashpia, v'da nekud al yoyna. This is the aspect of the nekud al yoyna, v'chinas kisei. And this is a reference to the higher point in the Aleph, the nekud al yoyna, which we said is an aspect of the kisei, which is the bechina of Moshe, because Moshe Rabbeinu's face was the face of the sun, and Kamoshe Kasa, the Pasuk Tehillim says, v'chisai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kisei, kashemesh negdi, is comparable to the sun. So the Rebbe makes a connection between the kisei, which we already know and have located the kisei above the rakia. Umimal the kisei is the rakia, the mal rakia rather is the kisei, and we've said that that's the nekud al yoyna sheba aleph. And now you have a pasuk linking the kisei to the shemesh. So Mamela, we know that nekud al yoyna is going to be the concept of the sun, and it's also the concept, of course, of Moshe Rabbeinu. The bechinas in the aspect, or bechinas umi ma'al l'rakia d'mus kisei, above the rakia, which we correlated with the concept of busha. When a person rises into that place where they actually yishmash bizyona yidim yishtak and v'lo yidaktek al bizyon kvaydai. So that's step number 1, and step number 2, where a person mamash feels the busha, and it enables a person to get further out of kvayd malachim and a little bit closer to kvayd alikim. Boom! A person finds themselves in the nekud al yoyna. The nekud al yoyna is kisei kashemesh negdi. Umimal rakia is the mas kisei. That's the nekud al yoyna. V'anakuda tachtoyna hi Yeshua, and the lower nekuda is Yeshua. Bechinas levana, because Yeshua is the aspect of the levana, and a completely separate pasuk, which we already referenced, says bechinas v'tachas raglav kemase livnas hasapir. Below the raglayim, which is the place of ha'aretz hadoim raglai, that place of the raglayim is the bechina of a livnas hasapir. Livnas hasapir is levana. Same letters. So we have the kisei kashemesh negdi, where the kisei above the vav, which is the rakia, is the aspect of the shemesh, and that's Moshe Rabbeinu, because pnei Moshe kepnei Chama, and that same Gemara Baba Basra tells us that Pnei Yeshua is Kepnei Levana, and that works out perfectly because we identified everything relative to the Rakia. We're on page Zion, right there, because everything relative to in this structure is relative to the Rakia. That which is above the Rakia, we said, is the Kisei that's above. Kisei Kashemesh, Shemesh is Moshe Rabbeinu. Everything below the rakia is going to be the nekuda tachtoina of the aleph, which we said, based on this pasuk, is v'tachas raglav, which is below the rakia, v'ha'aretz hadoim raglav, but the aretz, v'tachas raglav, is kemase livnas hasapir. Livnas hasapir is levana. Okay, so the Rebbe is using two different constructs, right, to connect the Nekuda Elyoina and the Nekuda Tachtoina respectively to the sun, Kisei Kashemesh, and the Kisei is Umimal Rakia, right, which is it's the pasuk Umimal Rakia Shal Rosham Eben Saper Tumus Kisei Kashemesh, and then below the Rakia is V'tachas Raglav Kamase Livnas Saper Dalavana. And again, v'havav shebaseicha aleph hu harakia, and the vav in between is itself the rakia, wherein the sun and the moon sort of coalesce, right, where they reside, and that's where the sun is shining into the moon in the context of the rakia, because the rakia, in the context that the Rebbe is setting up, where you have the aleph, is the bridge, is the space between the shemesh and the levana, and that's the rakia, where the shemesh and the levana are. So the Rebbe says, "Va'avav shebaseicha aleph hu harakia." That vav, which we already associated with the rakia, because that's the most important part, right? That's the starting point for us. Hu bechinas ha'oihel. This is the aspect of a tent. So you have Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the Nekuda Elyoina, and you have Yeshua, which is the Nekuda Tachtoina, and then the vav in the middle, which is the rakia, is the aspect of a tent. Kamash Kasav Yeshua ben Nun layamish mitoich ha'oihel. Yeshua ben Nun did not leave the Oyel. Who's Yeshua ben Nun in this context? The Nekuda Tachtoina, because Yeshua ben Nun, Pnei Yeshua, Pnei Lavana, right? V'tachas Raglav, Kemaise, Livnas Hasapir. If Yeshua layamish mitoich ha'oihel, that lets us know that the rakia, right, where Yeshua is positioned underneath, is the aspect of an Oyel. And not only that, but there's an explicit pasuk in Yeshayahu that tells us that the ha'oihel hu rakia. The Oyel, in a completely separate pasuk, is associated with the Rakia. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spread out Ka'oyel like a tent, L'Sheves, for them to be able to dwell. Uksiv, and the pasuk in Tehillim says, Noita Shamayim Ka'yariah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu stretched out the heavens like a Uriah. V'zehu, and the pasuk in Shemais tells us, Uriah's Ha'oyel. That the Oyel Moed had Uriahs, right? It had panels. And so if you put all these psukim together, you see the Rebbe is fortifying this structure by adding new elements. So now you have, for the Nekuda Elyoina, that's why it's important to have a chart if you can. The Nekuda Elyoina, let's start there, is the Bechina of K'fayid Elikim, is the Bechina of K'fayid Olam Haba, is the Bechina of Baki Beratzai, is the Bechina of the Nekuda Elyoina, which is the Kisei de Miskasio, which is Keser, is the Bechina of Chirik. I'm sorry, no, the Chirik is the Nekuda Tachtoina. We'll get to what the Nekuda of the Nekuda Elyoina is, the Nekudais of the Nekuda Elyoina is in a minute. That's, and now Moshe, right, and Shemesh. All these concepts, imagine if you had a chart, they don't have a chart there, but imagine if you had a chart, or you can create a chart, and it's really useful to create a chart, not on Shabbos, but any other day of the week, where a person can really map this whole thing out. Very important to be able to get this, because otherwise it's very abstract, but it's very holy. It's very holy, and it makes a very indelible imprint on the Jewish mind when a person's mind is expanded in this way. The Nekuda Tachtoina, going back to the beginning of the Torah, now that we have all of our different elements, the Nekuda Tachtoina is K'fayid Malachim. The Nekuda Tachtoina, actually sent a little bit of a chart to the chat the other day, right, yesterday. The Nekuda Tachtoina is K'fayid Malachim. The Nekuda Tachtoina is Ekya Anazamin L'Mahevi. One day it will be printed in thousands of copies, B'ezras Hashem. Hundreds of thousands, millions while we're at it, as Hashem, but it might take another couple of years. Hopefully not that much longer. K'fayid Malachim, Ekya, from the standpoint of Anazamin L'Mahevi, Dam to Daim, where a person's coming out of that situation, and that's K'fayid Olam Hazeh, and that's the aspect of Baki B'Shayv. That's the aspect of the Nekuda Tachtoina of the Aleph, which is connected to the Chirik, which now we're learning is the aspect of Yehoshua Levana. And the Vav in the middle is the aspect of Busha, is the aspect of the bridge that brings a person out of Kfod Olam Hazeh into Kfod Olam Haba, out of Kfod Malachim and into Kfod Elikim, out of the Nekuda Tachton of the Aleph or Baki B'Shayv to the Nekuda Elyon of the Aleph or Baki B'Ratzai, and it is the place where Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua are meeting, right? Because it's making a yichud between Chama and Levana. As the pasuk says, "V'Yeshua benun la yamish mitoich ha'ayil." Now the Kisei Elyon, here the Rebbe adds one final element, that the Kisei Elyon, that Nekuda Elyona, Hainu Nekuda Elyona, this is very important, Nechlekes l'shloish tipin, is split into 3 different points. So the Nekuda Tachtoina is how many points? How many dots? 1, because it's the Chirik. The Nekuda Elyona, the Rebbe is saying, is 3 points. What are 3 points? Segal, Chirik, and Segal. Why is the Nekuda Elyona split into 3 points? Ki tshuva tzarich liyas b'shalosh t'nayim. Because when a person finally reaches true tshuva, which is that level, the level above of the Nekuda Elyona needs to be with 3 t'nayim. K'may shekasav pen yir be'einav, lest his eyes see, uba'aznav yishma, and his ears hear, uluvava yavin, and his heart will understand, v'shav. And of course, Alavaba Yavin, Vishav, Yavin is Binah. And Binah, like we already said, is the place of tshuva, right? That's the Geulah tshuva shemagasat, Kisei HaKavod. The Kisei HaKavod is in Binah, right? Binah is that place that absorbs the penitent sinner. Alavaba Yavin. These 3 elements are the Nekuda of Segal. And a completely different place in Tikkun Zayar tells you that Segal, the Chama. The Chama is the concept of a segel. And over here the Rebbe, it's this abstract connection. Once you know, right, that the Nekuda Elyona is a bechina of the Chama because Kisei Kashemesh Negdi, and you've already connected Kisei to the whole construct of Kisei the Miskasi Keser, and you know that Tshuva has 3 elements and that's connected to a segel, boom, you look into Kunazir and say, well sure, the Chama is going to be connected to 3 Nekudas of a segel, because now we know what the Chama is, and the Rebbe is revealing the deepest secrets of the Torah in ways that without this construct you'd never understand what that Tikkun Zara meant. In what way is Chama segel? So Markesher says the Rebbe. Oh, you were he was wondering that, right? So here you come to this amazing thing, and all of a sudden, boom! It's just all the curtains are pulled away, and the Rebbe is revealing Soidei Torah. This might actually be Olam Haba. Like when they tell you about. Like this is it. This is it. We're mamish getting a taste of Oiros and Ma'oros and Gal'ena v'abit and Eflois Mitarasecha. This is the aspect of the segel. And I just want to briefly mention a very, very crucial thing. It's a very, very deep thing, and it's a huge asik in the book, and I'm going to make a very big deal about this. I'm just going to say very briefly, because this is not an Iyud Shir, and there's tons that I left out, obviously. I'm just giving what I consider to be the most basic understanding of Torah Vav, but every Nekuda is infinitely, infinitely deep. But this, I think, is an important Nekuda. I'm just going to say very briefly. Bear with me. There really are only 2 Nekudas. Meaning, there really only are 2 phases and not 3. Let me explain. This is a little bit abstract. The way that we've understood the Aleph is that there's a Nekuda Tachtoina, and then there's a Vav, and there's a Nekuda Elyona. The truth is that there really only ever is a Nekuda and the Vav. Because the minute that you get from the Nekuda Tachtoina into the Vav to the Nekuda Elyona, that Nekuda Elyona immediately becomes the Nekuda Tachtoina of the next Aleph up. And it keeps on going forever and ever. When this Hasaga hit me, I was in a shul, and I quickly found I had a highlighter in my pocket and some paper, and I drew it out, which is maybe I'll commission an artwork one day, an infinitely receding Aleph. Because it just continues and continues and continues. Yeah, the Nekuda Tachtoina, the Vav, and then the Nekuda Elyona, and then just a Vav. And then it goes and goes and goes and goes, and I had it like getting smaller and smaller up. And it was an incredible meditative technique, to really focus on this. Because the Nekuda Tachtoina, Hainu Hach, is the Nekuda Elyona, right, of the previous aleph, because Baki Baratzai enables a person to realize that they're actually in Shaiv, right, relationally, or in relation to Klape, the next Hasaga. And it goes around and around and around and around and around and around this way. This is the concept of Epinemius of the Yitnu Lacha Keser Melucha. I'm not getting into the whole thing now. The R Yaakov reveals that the highest link in any sephirus chain, or any system of 10 spheres, Keser, is itself the Malchus, not is connected to, is itself the Malchus of the previous chain, right? So if you have 10 spheres in Atzilus, and you have 10 spheres in Bria, right, the 10th sphera in Atzilus, which is Malchus, is itself the Keser of the next series of 10 going down a world. And so it is. And in the Aleph, of course, you have the same Bechina, right, where the Nakuda Tachtaina is in a certain sense Malchus, the Nakuda Al-Yaina Behefret, B'mefurish, right, is Keser, and that Keser is just the Malchus of the next level up, and it goes on and it goes on, and that's why very deeply, if you think about it, I want to say that, and I didn't see this in a parish, but the Rebbe said that we should say our Chidushim, but Lani Astaiti, the Nekudas Segel of the Nakuda Al-Yaina is itself a brand new Aleph. Meaning from very, very, very far, the Aleph looks like a segel. It's just like 3 points, It looks like there's just 3 dots, super distant. Once you get to the Nekuda El-Yaina, which is Baki B'Ratzai, which is Esak Shamayim Sham'ata, so over there what you're looking at is just a brand new Aleph, because it's kick-started again from the beginning. And you think that you got there only to realize that you're back on the bottom, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, infinitely. And even in that segel, really what you're seeing is just the next 2 stages, which is the Vav and the next Nekuda, because the Nekuda beyond that, right, is already the next Aleph, and so on, and so it goes. This is a very important Nasaga, if you can remember it, in a couple of years from now, when we get to Tar Zayin in the Likutei Tinyana. It's very useful over there, because over there, like I mentioned yesterday, the Rebbe speaks about Asagas Ben and Asagas Talmud, the Asaga of Aye Mikoin Kavoidai, which we connected to Baki B'Ratzai, where a person is on such a lofty madrega, but they have to know that they haven't even started, and that's Baki B'Ratzai. And that's the Asaga of Ben. That's what the Asaga that you need to give a person who thinks that they're very close. The tzaddik knows how to show a little bit of richuk. And to the person who thinks that they're very far, the Asag is Molech al Arts Kavaydai. But in Torah Zayin, Rebbe Nachman explains that really a person has to have a consciousness that's called Klalius Ben Vitalmid, where a person needs both at the very same time. A person needs to have their Bekias of Shaiv colored by their Bekias of Ratzai, or a person doesn't sink too deeply into it, because most of us are not either on one side of the spectrum or the other side. You're somewhere in the middle, and you need a klalius, you need a collectivity of these 2 energies. And the construct that I just presented makes that very beautiful, because it turns out that the Baki B'Ratzai is itself the Baki B'Shaiv, and the Baki B'Shaiv is itself the Baki B'Ratzai. Right? This construct enables you to realize that it's not just conceptually klalius, it is mamish in the Aleph. It's just one energy. Now, as it unfolds, so it manifests into 2 yuds, and a kuda tachton and a kuda yana, but it's really one. This is also useful to help us think about the relationship between Moshe and Yeshua, where it turns out that they're the same person. I mean, it's the same energy. They are all wrapped up into one Nakuda, same for Chama and Levana, and so on and so forth. Okay, those are some of the conceptual implications for that concept, but I just wanted to mention it because it's very dear and precious to me, but as Rosh Hashem, you'll read all about it in the upcoming sefer. Okay, here we come to Rabba Bar Bechana. V'zeh Pirish, and using this entire Hasaga of everything that we learned, which I think is probably one of the deepest that we've come across yet in the sefer, and they've all been extraordinary, but this is Tar Vav, like I told you. Tar Vav is a different league, it's a different level. V'zeh Pirish Amar Rabba Bar Bechana, we come to the Rabba Bar Bechana. And he said, Zibna Chadav Azlina B'Madabara. One time I was walking in the desert. I saw these geese. The Shmitin Gitfayu, Rashi tells us, Naflu, or Rashbam tells us rather, Naflu Noitza Shalahem Miroiv Shuman. their feathers were falling out because they were so fat. They were so oily. They're full of shaman. And so the shmitin gedfayu, right? Their gadaf, their wings, or really in this case their feathers, according to the Rashbam, were just falling out because they were just so they were bursting. And streams of oil were flowing from underneath these geese. This is what he saw in the desert. Very, very large geese. That the feathers were falling out and streams of oil are flowing out from them. And I said to these geese, do I have any portion among you in the world to come? One of the geese lifted its wings. Right? One of them lifted its wings. I'm sorry, Amta, one of them raises its thigh, and the other one raises its wing. When I told this to Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Li, he said, I want you to know, Asidin Yisrael litin aleim asadin. Klal Yisrael is gonna have to give judgment about these geese. What a strange thing, right? So take a look at the Rashbam. The Shmitin Kitfayu, Nafla Naitzis Shalahem Irav Shuman, their feathers were falling out because they were so fat. Dalya Li Gadva, Higbi Li Kanaf. Right, so one of them lifted his thigh, the other one lifted its kanaf. Ramaz Zeu Chulkala Asilav. This is your chelek. We are your chelek in Olam Haba. Why will Klal Yisrael need to be litin aleim asadin? Shebechata'asa misakiv Mashiach. Because Mashiach is being withheld and prevented because of our averos. V'yeshlem tsar balachayim loisan avazim. And we're causing tsar balachayim to these geese. Because these poor geese are waiting to be enjoyed. And the more time goes on, they're getting fatter and fatter. And it's very difficult for them. Machmas shumanan, because they are so large. What is going on here? All right, so what is this, and what does it have to do with Torah Vav? Says the Rebbe Shalach Lachar B'midat Tova Shalanava. Rabbi Barachana is being chayker, is thinking very deeply about the good, positive midah of anava. That's what it means. He was walking in the midbar. He was reflecting on what it means to be a midbar, what it means to be a person that everybody steps on this midbar, right? And that's what a midbar is in this context. Midbar is also medaber, which is how a person is going to be embarrassed, right? Because they're speaking all the time, and how did it need to turn dam into daim? V'ra chachamim, and he saw chachamim. Chachamim zabachinas havazeh, the aspect of geese. Kama shama chachamim is kind of the bracha. The Gemara says in brachas nun zayin amin aleph. Haray avaz b'chalaim. If you see a goose in your brain, in your dream, yitzapal chachma, you should look forward to an increase in your wisdom. So you see that geese are connected to Chochmah. So he was seeing the concept of Chachamim, which we're going to see in a minute what that is. That's why that's relevant to the aspect of Anivos. The Shmitin Getfayu, says Rashi, Noitzais. You see, he says Rashi, it's really the Rashbam, is Noitzais. This is the aspect of Machloikis and Bezyoinais, people who are challenging a person's Kvoid Malachim. What does it have to do with feathers? Because the word Noitzais could also mean Milashon Kimaisha Kasav Ki Inatsu Anashim, when people will be fighting one another. So the Shmitin Gitfayu, there was an aspect of noitzos. There was an aspect of a person who, because he's a medaber, a midbar, because he's speaking so much, he needs to become a medaber. He needs to turn dam into daim. How is that going to happen? When people are challenging him, when people are embarrassing him. Yinatsu anashim. Where a person doesn't get involved and doesn't cause his knee-jerk, very egoic sense of self to respond right away. They hear themselves being embarrassed, and they don't respond. And that's why they're called chachamim, which is the bechina of the geese, because a person who sees a geese in his dream should be mitzapet to chachma. What does it have to do with chachma? This, that a person doesn't respond to ki yenutzan anashim, when a person is being attacked. Ki siyag la chachma shtika. Because chachma enables a person to connect to the midah of shtika. And dafka, shtika, is a siyag l'chachma, ki shtika hu b'chinas keser. And that's why shtika brings a person into keser. Look on the note on the side. Ki shtika zeich in the tshuva, because we said that when a person responds or doesn't respond, or really responds, right, to themselves being embarrassed with silence, it's a b'china of tshuva, sheb'chinas keser k'nis galel, which we said is keser. V'zeh b'chinas siyag l'chachma, shtika. Siyag daika. The fence of chachma. What's the fence of Chochmah? Zebechinas Keser. Because the sphere of Chochmah has a fence. What's the fence of the sphere of Chochmah? Is the crown, which is like a fence for the brain, a fence for the head. So the Siyag LeChochmah is Keser, and the Mishnah tells us Siyag LeChochmah Shtika. You want to get to Keser? Siyag LeChochmah Shtika. Unbelievable. Pile Playim, for that alone, right? Pile Playim. Shebechina siyag v'gader, because keser is like a siyag. Saviv saviv, it's a crown. Shemesader umachtir uma'ater es ha'chachma. It surrounds and it crowns the chachma. V'zeh keser shebechina siyag nasa me'ashtika, and this is produced through silence. There's siyag la'chachma shtika. So that's the connection between these geese and chachma. What does that mean? Shmitin, shamat kobal masha yada. When it comes to shmita, right? That's what it's called, shmita, shamat, right? The loans are the creditors will remit the loan, right? The loans go away. Meaning shamat, like he will withhold. He won't respond. Shmitin gitfayu noitzos. When there's fighting, shmitin, he withholds himself. And that's the bechina of the avaz, of the goose, because whoever sees geese in a dream should be mitzapa to chachma. What's chachma? Siyag lechachma, shtika, keser. V'zepirish mishmanayhu. And this is the aspect of, well, why is this, with the geese going through this whole process? Mishmanay, because they're so large, they're so fat. Miloshin shamanta avisa. Like the pasuk says about Klal Yisrael, as we're going to see in the next line, you've grown shamanta. You've grown thick. Kaleimar machmas, in the page, ha'oichsin atzmam b'bechina shamanta avisa, because they held themselves in a very gaividik way, in a very arrogant way, in a very puffed up way. Hana b'shvul zeh shoymim charpasa ve'enim meshivim. Because shmitin gefayu machmas, they're mishmanayu, right? The shmitin gatfayu mishmanayu. Because they had become so large, and they were medaber, they needed siyag l'chachma, shtika avaz is chachma, and shmitin gedfayu is noitzos, and people were fighting with them, and the shmitin gedfayu, they didn't respond, they were shamit, they withheld from responding. And that's because of mishmenayu, because they were so fat, they were so large. Because of this, they needed to go through the process of shoymim charpasam ve'inam meshivim, of hearing themselves be embarrassed and not responding. Because this is the tshuva g'mayshikasav v'yishman yeshurun. That yeshurun, which is really the highest title that there is for Klal Yisrael, v'yishman, we've become fat, right? Again and again and again, the psukim reference growing fat to the aspect of being people who need to do tshuva. V'yishman yeshurun v'yivat. Bechinas hashmein lev ha'am. The heart of this people has grown again. Shamein has grown fat. And the rest of that pasuk is pen ba'azav yishma be'enayim yira. What's the pasuk? Pen yira be'enav uva'aznav yishama u'levav yavin u'levav yavin v'shav. Right? Those three aspects of tshuva come at the end of a pasuk which begins Hashmein Lev Ha'am. Right? So it's all about the Shuman. That tshuva is because of these three aspects, which are the segal of that aspect of the higher nekuda of the Aleph. And there were streams of oil that were flowing from underneath them. Through shtika, a person is zeicha the kvoda l'ki shebechina shemen. This covered is the aspect of shemen, that the whole process was underscored by the shemen that was flowing out from under these geese, chachma, whose feathers, noitzim, were falling out, shamat, right, withholding from responding on account of, because the person needed to do tshuva because of hashmein leva, because machmash manayu was underscored by shemen that's flowing out, which is an aspect of kvoda l'kim, Kamaisha Kasav, Ahavta Tzedek, you've loved righteousness, Vatisna Resha, and you stayed away from wickedness, Al Kain Mishachacha, therefore I have anointed you. And so you see that Shemen is connected to the concept of a person who's doing tshuva, who is Sur Meira, Tisna Resha, Asay Toiv, Oyev Tzedek, Al Kain Mishachacha, Zabachinas, Melech HaKavod. Right? What do you mean anointed? Anointed, you anoint a king. You anoint a king, the king is the Bechina of Kavod, and it's Kfar Eliki. Melech HaKavod. V'amin eluhu, and so Rabbi Bar Chana said that I told these geese, Isli Menai Chochol Kol Ha'amud Aseh, do I have any connection with you in the world to come? Ma Kesha, the world to come, because tshuva is the process of going from Kvod Olam Hazeh to Kvod Olam Haba. And he wants to know, am I going to experience this process so successfully that I'm able to go from Kvod Olam Hazeh, from Baki B'Shoiv into Baki B'Ratzai, and to rise, and to rise, and to rise? Chad Yadali Li Amta, one of them lifted its foot, its thigh. Ze Bechinas Va'aretz Hadayim Raglai, Bechinas Nekuda Tachtoina. One of them lifted its leg, which is the Bechina of Baki B'Shoiv, of the Nekuda Tachtoina of the Aleph. And Chad Yadali Li Kanaf, and one of them lifted its wings. I mean, Ze Bechinas Kisei. So not only is it conceptually similar, because if you have a wing and a thigh, you have something below and something above, and it's a goose. Only Rebbe Nachman looks at a goose and sees the letter Aleph. The Rebbe's mamish seeing in this goose of the vision of Rabbi Bar Chana is the letter Aleph. One of them is lifting its thigh, one of them is lifting its wing. It's the Nekuda Tachtoina and the Nekuda Aliyona. But that's not enough for the Rebbe. That conceptually it's similar. The Rebbe brings a pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'la yekanef oid meirecha." Your teacher will no longer be hidden behind his garment. V'la yekanef oid meirecha. What's a kanaf? Is a wing. And so in this context, you have that a wing is that which covers. That which covers is kisei de miskasia. Kisei de miskasia is keser. Nekud al yaina. Zebuchinas nekud al yaina. Hainu sheheru l'Rabbi Bar Chana shegam hu zacha le'ila bechinas. They were showing him, don't worry, you've made it. You have the nekud tachtoina. You have the nekud al yaina. You have kfod olam hazeh. You have kfod olam haba. And Amar Belazar, guess what? And this is so brilliant. Asidin Yisrael litin aleim esadin. Now, what does it mean on a simple level? We said it was a very bad thing, right? Because they're causing these geese to be so fat and it's tsar balachayim. Says Rebbe Lazar, listen to the words that he says. Asidin Yisrael, there will come a time when Am Yisrael will litin aleihem esadin, which can be read not as Klal Yisrael will give judgment for them, right? Nitan aleihem, but rather Klal Yisrael will proclaim justice or judgment on them. What does that mean? Says the Rebbe, because once a Yid has attained the Aleph, he becomes Aleph Dam, right? Adam, less Adam, B'li Aleph. He has Havaya in the world. He becomes an Adam. And at that point, when a person attains Kfod Eliki, he reflects that Selam Elokim, that person doesn't exist. The person is mamish, a representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvod v'atzmei in the world. V'Yisrael shem b'chinas Adam yeshvu ala kisei. And Klal Yisrael will become the manifestation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the world. That just like the Psukim say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the end of times will judge the nations, that's us. Because when we're living out of our Tselem Elikim, getting out of Kfod Malachim and into Kfod Elikim, we will be Yeshvu ala Kisei. Because the Rebbe said that Nasa Adam Lasheves ala Kisei. Once a person accesses the Aleph, which is the Nekuda Tachtoina, the Vav in the middle, the Nekuda Aliyona, which is the Kisei de Miskasia of Keser, that's a Kisei HaKavod. Who sits on the Kisei? Udemus Kemara Adam Alav Milamala. There was an Adam above it. What's the Adam? Aleph Dam. Because the person accessed this whole process, and a person is now the Adam that's sitting on the kisei on top. Says the Rebbe, V'Yisrael shehim b'chinas Adam yeshvu ala kisei, will be the one sitting on the throne. And we will be the ones to judge the nations. We will have that power. Hainu heim yishbetu ba'atzmam kol adinim. So look back at what Rebbe Eliezer says. Amar Rebbe Eliezer, Asidin Yisrael, litain aleihem es hadin. What's aleihem? On the goose, or on these geese. What's the geese? The letter Aleph. One lifted the thigh, nekuda tachtoina. The other lifted the wing, nekuda al yaina. Every aspect, they have shemen coming out from under them. That's the aspect. Ahavta tzedek v'tisna resh al kei meshachacha melech hakavod. And the whole thing is because they were fat, vayishman yishurin vayivat, and so they needed to do tshuva, and their feathers are falling out. The bechina of ki yinatzu anashim. People are fighting with them. To shmitin getfayu, they're not responding. When a Jew accesses this whole vision in his or her life, every person to relative perspectives, because it's a constant ladder of growth from the Nekuda Tachtaina to the Nekuda Yaina, which becomes the Nekuda Tachtaina of the next Aleph, as we explained, and you keep on going up and up and up and up. Eventually a person has a kisei, and you become the Adam that's sitting on the kisei. So Asid in Yisrael litain aleihem, sitting on these geese, Klal Yisrael, which are the Demus Kamara Adam, which are fully realized Selam Alikim, having access Kfaid Alikim, will be Litain Aleihem Es Hadin. And that's La'asid Lavai. But Ezras Hashem, next week we'll carry on from Ois Zayin. I'll just give you a little bit of a map. From Ois Zayin until the upper paragraph on the next column is basically the end, as it were, of Torah Aleph, from the standpoint of all of the different aspects that are being revealed in the lesson. And then, as we're going to see, Rebbe Nachman takes over, and Rebbe Nachman shows us how every single aspect of the lesson is a true pirush on the Arizal's Kabbalistic intentions for the month of Elul, which is all Kabbalistic shemas, but based on the Hakdamas of Rebbe Nachman, it's revelations upon revelations upon revelations. So, a lot to look forward to next week. B'siyata d'shmaya. Yasher Koach Yidin, thank you so much for joining. Ashreinu, good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Try to chazer if you can. If you could do chazar over Shabbos, try to spend some time with it tonight. It's a long Friday night. You can sit and praying over this for a long time. Ani haben v'ata ha'av shali shekol kach ohev oti ha'av shali melech chai v'kayah al kol neshima she'ani